You're probably at least a little familiar with Mindflayers or Illithids by now, since they seemingly play an integral role in the plot of Baldur's Gate 3. And Illithids are indeed fascinating, if not terrifying creatures, but not all Illithids fit the mold of what you might have come to expect with respect to them. Indeed, we meet one such one in the Underdark, Amalum in Baldur's Gate 3, who is a member of the Society of Brilliance, showing us that not all Illithids conform to the expectation of a tentacled villain seeking to dominate all sentient creatures. Amalum's example, however, although rare, is not entirely unique, and there is more than one way an Illithid might defect from its society. This, then, is the purpose of this video, to explore the few ways Illithids might diverge for both good or ill from the classic aberration we've come to expect of them. To understand why a Mind Flayer might defect from its community, whatever the specific intent behind it, it would be wise to understand how Illithid society works. Mind Flayers are by their very nature collectivists in the extreme, which is something easily forgotten as one tends to focus on their evil and less so on the strict hierarchy that governs their lives. To be sure, Illithids do want to blot out the sun and sink the world into eternal darkness, but there are rules on how they wish to achieve that. Illithid society is based on the premise that all creatures are beneath them, to either exist as a source of food, to serve them as slaves or thralls, or as vessels for their parasitic reproduction. And within this broad perspective is the view that Illithids should dominate the world, and even the multiverse, which they view as a chaotic, fragile thing, deeply in need of caretaking in order of the sort that only the Illithids can deliver. Megalomaniacal in the extreme, they believe that dominating, devouring, and enslaving others is in fact granting the lesser races a gift that they are simply too stupid to comprehend or recognize. Although competitive with each other and ruthless, being extremely lawful creatures, and collectivists in nature, Illithids view gaining knowledge and power at the individual level as beneficial to the group, as it potentially adds resources to the greater collective. To a Mind Flayer, knowledge is power, which on the face of it seems cliché, and yet when one considers how physically weak they are, but how mentally prodigious they are, it makes perfect sense. Illithids will routinely go to great lengths to acquire knowledge if they deem it useful, and will kill, bargain, trade, and steal, and do just about anything else to obtain it if they feel the knowledge is justified. Illithids rarely, if ever, share the same range of emotions as humans and demi-humans do, as the range of their emotions would typically be described as negative. Envy, hatred, pride, and other negative emotions are not infrequent, and the closest emotion a Mind Flayer might have to joy is the sensation of pleasure it has as it devours the brain of a lesser creature, as different brains provide different sensations of pleasure and enjoyment to a Mind Flayer. Mind Flayer communities, or cities if one wishes to use the term, are comparatively small, numbering from a few hundred individuals to a few thousand at most in terms of actual Illithids, and many more if one counts thralls and food stock, and it is from here that they plan and plot. But every Illithid community is dominated by one creature that controls virtually all things, and that is the Elder Brain. The Elder Brain is the centerpiece and linchpin of any and all Illithid society, and is integral to a functional community. And most Illithids follow a particular life path. They are created through the process of seromorphosis, a process you are likely familiar with by now. Here a tadpole is placed under the eye, in the nostril, or in the ear of a humanoid, and the Illithid tadpole buries itself into the brain of the victim. If all goes according to plan, then an Illithid will be born after approximately a week, something the heroes of Baldur's Gate 3 are an exception to for obvious plot armor-driven reasons. And after this, the Illithid, although seemingly an adult, requires mentorship to mentally and psychologically mature, for which a period of 20 years is typically required. An Illithid usually lives for approximately 120 years. At the end of this life cycle, an Illithid's brain is collected and added to the massive brains that make up the Elder Brain. And Illithids commonly believe that their essence will be added to it, becoming part of a collective consciousness of the Elder Brain, and thus living on in some capacity. However, the great secret, known typically only to the Elder Brain, is that only the collective knowledge of the deceased Illithids is absorbed, as the Elder Brain is actually a singular consciousness possessed of collective knowledge, rather than a collection of consciousnesses, meaning that Illithids are deceived and do not live on as part of the consciousness of the Elder Brain. This secret is guarded with utmost scrutiny, as were it to be known that common Illithids were being lied to about their ultimate fate, it would almost certainly lead to rebellion and defection, And indeed, when an Illithid does defect from greater Mindflayer society, it necessarily means that it is cutting ties from the Elder Brain, as Elder Brains are in constant telepathic communication with Illithids within several miles under their sway, and in many cases have complete control over them. The primary and most natural way in which Illithids might part ways from the standard life cycle of their kin is for an Ulatharid to be born. Between only 1 in 25 to 1 in 100 Mindflayer tadpoles will evolve into a so-called Ulatharid, which is effectively the equivalent of a noble in Illithid society. They are smarter, stronger, longer-lived, and more powerful, and typically possess 6 long tentacles instead of the shorter standard 4. Whereas normally an Elder Brain has control over Illithids, an Ulatharid is not subject to the control of an Elder Brain. And eventually, most Ulatharids will seek to break free from their original community, taking several normal Illithid followers with them, and it is in this manner that new Illithid communities are formed. When an Ulatharid ages and eventually dies, its brain is placed in a vat to become a larval Elder Brain, and the cycle is begun anew, as the brains of deceased Illithids are added to it, adding to its knowledge base and power. But true renegades are those who wholly reject the aforementioned life paths available to the Illithids for less predictable reasons. Exceedingly rare are Mindflayers that, for reasons unknown, reject the deep-seated and intrinsic evil of the species. If nothing else, exceptions prove the rule. This usually requires a trait that allows them to break free in the first place. Omelum, the Illithid you can meet in the Underdark, and member of the Society of Brilliance, states that it is broken free at the Grand Design, which refers to the Illithid's desire to rebuild their lost empire and their long-term goals and plans. Such Illithids are rarely good in any traditional sense, and tend towards much more neutral alignments. But neither do they desire to pursue the standard activities of domination of so-called lesser species and races, and they become targets to be eliminated by the Elder Brain through its normal Illithid agents, as those who break free from the Elder Brain's control are always considered a threat to its authority, consequently, all of Mindflayer society. Perhaps the greatest threats and renegades within Illithid society are those Mindflayers who either discover magical aptitude, as Amalum did, or choose to practice arcane magic, for whatever reason. Mindflayer culture views arcane magic as an abomination, something unnatural, and worthy of being purged from the universe, viewing only their own psionic and mental powers as appropriate. A large part of this view is cultivated, as could be expected, by the Elder Brain, because arcane power is something that could lead to an upset in the balance of power, thus undermining the Elder Brain's influence and control. However, because Illithids are supremely intelligent, and intelligence is the muscle of the wizard, when Illithids do study the arcane, they tend to excel at it, and indeed are fully capable of combining their native psionic powers with any arcane spells they might have learned, and for these reasons, when a magic-wielding Illithid becomes known, it will be ruthlessly hunted down, as it will be perceived as a threat to the grand design of Illithid society. Omelum itself tells you as much, as it was born with a propensity for arcane magic. Such magic-wielding Illithids are exceptionally dangerous, both in part due to their arcane power, coupled by their normal abilities, but also in part due to their desperation and the situation they find themselves in, with no allies either within Mindflayer society or outside of it, often finding themselves resorting to the most extreme measures in order to survive. And not all such Illithids are of the somewhat benign nature we encounter in Omelum. Essentially any and all Illithids that do not fall in line with the established hierarchy of Mindflayer society, with the Elder Brain at the top, will be deemed renegades and dangerous, and therefore worthy of destruction. Which leads us to the question as to how the tadpole-infected adventurers fit into this, because stasis-controlled tadpoles are definitely not part of the standard Mindflayer protocol, and what is most obvious is the curious absence of any real mention of an Elder Brain in Baldur's Gate 3, hinting at the rather obvious magical nature of the tadpoles, something that no Elder Brain would ever agree to, and thus giving us hard evidence that the entire plot that has been contrived around the Mindflayers has not been voluntary on their part, and that something most certainly has taken control of them from the outside. This much we know. They are a means to an end, but not the end itself. They are simply a tool for somebody else's goals. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out later. Take care.